In the quiet, privileged classrooms of his youth, a boy destined for military greatness harbored a profound secret. George Smith Patton, Jr. was born into a life defined by martial legacy. His family lineage was a pantheon of American heroes. His paternal grandfather, George S. Patton I, was a Confederate colonel killed in action, a figure of battlefield glory. From his earliest boyhood, young Patton consumed stories of military heroes, reading everything he could find. He became convinced that his own destiny was preordained. He would become a famous general, and his life would culminate in the ultimate glory a man could achieve, a heroic death on the field of battle. But this scion of a warrior family, who dreamed of commanding armies, struggled desperately with the most basic academic tasks. He could not read or write with any fluency. Historians and biographers now widely concur that Patton suffered from a severe learning disorder, almost certainly dyslexia. This condition, undiagnosed in his time, made his early education an agonizing ordeal. He was diligent, yet faltered in subjects like arithmetic and geometry. To cope, he developed a set of remarkable strategies. He relied heavily on oral learning, forcing his mind to become a vast repository of memorized information. His family, particularly his aunt, would read texts aloud to him, allowing him to absorb complex ideas through listening rather than reading. This daily battle against his own mind forged an iron-willed resilience, but the academic toll was high. His intellectual struggles led to his initial rejection from the United States Military Academy at West Point. He was forced to attend the Virginia Military Institute for a year to prove his mettle. Even after gaining acceptance to West Point, his academic performance remained substandard, and he was forced to repeat his entire freshman year. It would ultimately take him 5 long years to graduate from the 4-year institution. This profound hidden insecurity is the key to understanding the man he would become. The famous Patton persona, the brash, loud, and famously profane commander known as Old Blood and Guts, was not his natural state. It was an elaborate, meticulously crafted suit of armor. In an era when such learning difficulties were simply labeled as feeble-minded, Patton lived in constant fear of being perceived as intellectually inferior. To combat this private terror, he was compelled to project overwhelming, unassailable strength and confidence. His inability to master the written word forced him to master oral communication and physical presence. The stern war face he practiced, the imposing figure, and the controversial vulgarity-laden speeches were all tools in a lifelong compensation mechanism, an armor forged to mask his deepest perceived deficiency. While his mind struggled with books, his body excelled. At West Point, Patton transformed himself into a remarkable athlete. He ran on the E track team, setting a school record in the hurdles. He was an expert horseman and became an accomplished polo player. He dedicated himself to fencing, becoming so proficient that he was tasked with designing the M919 cavalry saber, which would become known simply as the Patton saber. He also excelled in sharpshooting with both rifle and pistol. This unique combination of disparate skills, running, fencing, shooting, and riding, made him the ideal candidate to represent the United States in a brand-new grueling event at the 1912 Summer Olympics in Stockholm, the Modern Pentathlon. The event, the brainchild of modern Olympics founder Baron Pierre de Coubertin, was designed specifically to test the skills of the ultimate soldier. It consisted of 5 disciplines: a 300-meter swim, a 4,000-meter cross-country run, pistol shooting, épée fencing, and a 5,000-meter equestrian steeplechase. Here, Patton's singular willpower found its perfect expression. He applied the same ferocious determination that got him through West Point, and the cadet who had to repeat a year stunned the world by finishing 5th overall against the best athletes on the planet. The 1912 Olympics was the true crucible for his future command style. The pentathlon is not about being the world's best at one thing. It is about being proficient in 5 separate skills and, more importantly, synthesizing them into a single performance. This was a direct prefiguration of his military genius. Decades later, Patton would become America's foremost practitioner of combined arms, the modern art of synthesizing armor, infantry, artillery, and air support into one irresistible, high-speed phalanx. His revolutionary leadership doctrine was not learned in the West Point library he so despised. It was forged on the athletic fields of Stockholm. This obsessive drive, first tested in sport, would soon find its true purpose in the crucible of mechanized warfare. Patton's first taste of combat came in 1916 on the dusty, sun-baked plains of northern Mexico. After the revolutionary Francisco Pancho Villa raided the town of Columbus, New Mexico, the U.S. Army launched the punitive expedition to hunt him down. The expedition was commanded by General John J. Black Jack Pershing, a man Patton knew personally. Desperate to see his first action, Patton, then a young cavalry lieutenant, campaigned for a position and was appointed as Pershing's aide-de-camp. This expedition was a pivotal moment in military history, marking the U.S. Army's first operational use of both airplanes and, critically, motor vehicles in a combat role. On May 14, 1916, Patton demonstrated the instinct that would define his career. A traditional cavalryman steeped in romantic notions of warfare, he was assigned a mundane task: to lead a small foraging party to purchase corn. Instead, he took 3 Dodge touring cars and 15 men on a mission he had clearly planned himself: a raid on the San Miguelito Ranch. He was hunting Julio Cardenas, a high-ranking captain in Villa's organization and leader of his personal bodyguard. In what became the first motorized attack in U.S. military history, Patton led the charge. A chaotic firefight erupted, and Patton, using his famous ivory-handled pistol, personally shot Cardenas. In a move that shocked his contemporaries and cemented his Bandito nickname, he then had the bodies of the 3 slain men strapped to the hoods of the Dodge automobiles and drove them 90 miles back to Pershing's headquarters. This single event reveals Patton's core genius. He was the U.S. Army's great transitional warrior. He was a 19th-century romantic who designed a cavalry saber and carried custom revolvers. Yet, in his very first combat action, he instinctively abandoned the horse for the motor car. He was among the first to understand that the spirit of the cavalry, audacity, shock, and speed, was not obsolete. It simply needed a new mount. He saw the internal combustion engine as the new horse, a revolutionary concept that would define his entire career and lay the groundwork for America's armored doctrine. He used this incident to argue for a place in America's new tank corps. When the U.S. entered World War I, Patton arrived in Europe in 1917 and immediately took an intense interest in the tank. He was assigned to establish the American Expeditionary Force Light Tank School, where he trained the very first generation of American tankers and personally oversaw the logistics of their deployment. True to his nature, he did not command from the rear. During the Meuse-Argonne offensive on September 26, 1918, he led his tanks directly into combat. When the machines became entangled in a trench barrier, he advanced beyond them, on foot, leading his men forward with only a walking stick. That morning, a protective shield of fog began to lift, suddenly revealing Patton and his small band of men to a line of at least 25 German machine gun nests. The air exploded with withering fire. His men instantly dove for the security of a trench, imploring him to take cover. But Patton, fueled by his romantic vision of warfare, refused to budge. "To hell with them, they can't hit me," he yelled. Moments later, a machine gun bullet tore through his upper leg, creating a severe wound. He collapsed into a shell hole. Bleeding profusely, he lay there for hours as the battle raged. Yet he refused to be evacuated. He would not leave until he had dictated a full report from the shell hole and ensured his command was properly transferred to his subordinate. For this extraordinary bravery, he was promoted to colonel and awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. This moment, his first major wound, was psychologically transformative. It created what might be called Patton's Immortality Fallacy. He held a deep romantic belief that his destiny was to die in battle. In his first significant test, he faced near-certain death from 25 machine guns, was struck down, and survived. This validated his deepest-held sense of destiny. His defiant cry, "They can't hit me," was no longer just bravado. In his mind, it was a proven fact. This belief became his greatest battlefield asset, granting him the superhuman courage to lead from the front and take audacious risks that astounded his enemies. But it also became his greatest and most tragic flaw. From that day forward, his personal standard for bravery became his own experience. The only valid reason to leave the front line was a physical, bleeding wound. This rigid, uncompromising belief, forged in a shell hole in the Argonne, would later prove disastrous. This reputation for invincibility and ruthless drive would be desperately needed when America faced its next great test. When the United States entered the Second World War, its forces were untested. After the U.S. Army's humiliating rout at Kasserine Pass in North Africa, General Dwight D. Eisenhower needed a commander who could restore the broken U.S. 222 Corps. He chose Patton. Arriving in North Africa for Operation Torch, Patton immediately imposed his iron will. He enforced rigid discipline, demanding that all soldiers be properly uniformed and subjected to rigorous training. He transformed the demoralized, defeated Corps into a confident fighting force and led them to a revitalizing victory against German armor at the Battle of El Ghoutar. In July 1943, Patton was given command of the 7th Army for Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily. His performance was a masterpiece of aggressive, armored warfare. Forcing the directives of his superiors, he pushed his forces far beyond the conservative plans drawn up by the British. He famously captured the city of Palermo and then won the race to Messina against his British rival, General Bernard Montgomery, cementing his legend as a brilliant, high-speed commander. But this triumph was immediately and catastrophically overshadowed by two events that would nearly end his career. On August 3 and August 10, 1943, Patton visited evacuation hospitals to see his wounded men. There, he encountered Private Charles Cool and Private Paul Bennett, respectively. Both soldiers were suffering from what was then known as battle fatigue, or shell shock, the psychological trauma of combat. Patton, inspecting the men, saw no physical wounds. When Cool replied to a question by saying, "I guess I just can't take it," Patton's temper flared. He cursed the soldier, called him a coward, and then slapped him across the face with his gloves and kicked him out of the tent. A week later, he repeated the scene with Private Bennett, who was shivering and crying. Patton lost his temper completely, called Bennett a yellow bastard, and threatened to have him shot. He then repeatedly slapped the soldier. This was not merely a random loss of temper. It was the direct, inevitable consequence of the immortality fallacy he had developed in 1918. His contemporaries, including Eisenhower and General Omar Bradley, later stated that Patton sincerely believed that battle fatigue did not exist. The reason for this belief traces directly back to the Meuse-Argonne shell hole. His own defining moment of courage was overcoming a grievous physical wound. To Patton, these soldiers, who were physically whole, were a betrayal of his most sacred code. His violent reaction was a deeply personal offense against the standard of duty he himself had bled for. When journalist Drew Pearson leaked the story, it caused a public firestorm in the United States. Eisenhower severely reprimanded Patton and ordered him to apologize to the soldiers and all concerned. Patton was relieved of command of the 7th Army and effectively sidelined for 11 months. His career seemed over. He was used as a decoy for Operation Fortitude, the elaborate deception plan for the D-Day landings. The Allies placed him in England, knowing the Germans so feared his tactical genius that they would keep entire armies in Pas-de-Calais, convinced he was leading the real invasion. His redemption finally came after the invasion. On August 1st, 1944, his new command, the Third Army, was activated in France. He was unleashed. As part of Operation Cobra, the breakout from the Normandy hedgerows, Patton's army executed one of the most remarkable advances in military history, racing across France at a speed that stunned both allies and enemies. His crowning achievement came in the winter of 1944. On December 16th, the Germans launched their final, desperate counteroffensive, the Battle of the Bulge, creating a massive salient in the Allied lines. They succeeded in surrounding the 101st Airborne Division at the vital crossroads town of Bastogne. At an emergency high command meeting, Patton made an audacious, almost unbelievable claim. He could disengage his Third Army, which was fighting on a different front, pivot it 90 degrees north, and launch a counterattack to relieve Bastogne in 48 hours. It was considered a logistical impossibility. Yet he did it. In one of the most remarkable feats of leadership and logistics of the war, his troops marched over 100 miles through icy, treacherous roads. On December 26, 1944, the lead elements of Patton's 4th Armored Division broke through the German lines and ended the siege. He had saved the American line and cemented his legacy as one of history's greatest field commanders. He had survived machine guns, shell fire, and the near-total destruction of his career. He seemed, as he had always believed, untouchable. The war in Europe ended in May 1945. For General George S. Patton, it was not a relief but a profound burden. At 60 years old, his life's singular purpose, warfare, was gone. He had lobbied aggressively for a combat command in the Pacific Theater, but was denied. Instead, he was assigned as the military governor of Bavaria, a desk job he despised. His famously outspoken nature, once a tool for inspiring troops, proved disastrous in peacetime. His impolitic public statements questioning the Allies' denazification policies had recently caused an international incident, forcing Eisenhower to relieve him of command of his beloved Third Army. By December 1945, Patton was deeply depressed, withdrawn, and had little to say to his staff. He was merely waiting to return to the United States. His flight home was scheduled for December 10th. On Sunday, December 9th, 1945, his loyal chief of staff, Major General Hobart Happ, suggested a pheasant hunting trip near Spire to lift the general's low spirits. Patton agreed. The party consisted of 3 men in the general's official car: Patton, General Hobart, and the driver. The car was a 1938 Cadillac Model 75, which Patton had used as a staff car since May. At the wheel was Private First Class Horace L. Woody Woodring, just 19 years old. Woodring was a new driver, a replacement for Patton's longtime trusted chauffeur, Master Sergeant John L. Mims, who had returned to the U.S. and whom Patton had praised for never having so much as bumped a fender in years of hazardous driving. In the back seat, General Hobart sat on the left, while Patton, as the ranking officer, took the seat of honor on the right. At approximately 11:45 a.m., the Cadillac was traveling at a low speed, estimated at no more than 20 miles per hour, through the suburbs of Mannheim near a railroad crossing. The general was not paying attention to the road. He was gazing out the right side window at the derelict, war-torn vehicles lining the route. He turned to General Hobart and made one of his last recorded comments. "How awful war is. Think of the waste." At that exact moment, an oncoming 2.5-ton GMC U.S. Army truck, driven by Technical Sergeant Robert L. Thompson, made a sudden and unexpected left turn. Thompson was cutting across the Cadillac's path to enter a quartermaster depot on the side of the road. PFC Woodring, the driver, saw the truck turn but was unable to stop in time. The Cadillac's front end plowed into the passenger side of the truck. The impact was, by all accounts, minor. The collision occurred at such a low speed that the vehicles were hardly damaged. The Cadillac's radiator and front fender were smashed, but photographs from the scene confirmed that not a single window of the big car was broken. The consequences for the occupants seemed to reflect this. In the GMC truck, T5 Thompson and his 2 passengers were completely unhurt. In the Cadillac, the driver, PFC Woodring, was unhurt. In the back seat, Major General Hobart was unhurt. Only 1 man was injured. Thrown forward by the low-speed momentum, the 60-year-old general's head had violently struck a metal part of the rigid partition between the front and back seats. He was thrown back, slumping onto the seat. He was conscious but bleeding from a nasty gash on his head and scalp. He was struggling to breathe. It was a perfect storm of mundane factors. The 1938 Cadillac was a product of its time, lacking any modern safety features like seat belts and featuring a solid, unpadded interior partition. Furthermore, Patton was distracted, looking out the side window at the moment of impact, and was therefore not braced for the frontal collision. This convergence of 1930s automotive design and a simple, non-hostile error in judgment created a unique and fatal vulnerability for Patton and only Patton. The man who had survived German artillery barrages that landed yards from his house and machine gun fire that tore through his body was brought down by simple physics. As General Hobart rushed to help him, Patton was preternaturally calm. He knew immediately what had happened. He reportedly barked at his friend, "Go ahead, Hap, work my fingers." Hobart rubbed the general's fingers, but Patton felt nothing. He knew he was paralyzed. The man who had moved faster and further than any general in history was now completely, terrifyingly still. General Patton was carefully lifted from the wrecked Cadillac and rushed 12 miles to the 130th Station Hospital in Heidelberg. He was admitted within an hour of the collision. The medical team immediately performed X-rays, which revealed the full catastrophic extent of the injury. The films showed a severe fracture of his C3 vertebra and a posterior dislocation of C4 on C5. Simply put, Patton had broken his neck. The damage to his cervical spinal cord was irreversible, resulting in complete paralysis from the neck down. Quadriplegia. For the next 12 days, the world's most aggressive and dynamic general lay completely immobilized in a hospital bed, a prisoner in his own body. He received the best medical care 1945 could offer, but the treatment was grim. He was placed in traction to stabilize his spine and prevent further damage. This involved a system of weights and, at times, the use of painful Crutchfield tongs or even hooks implanted into his jaw and cheeks to maintain the alignment of his fractured vertebrae. His wife, Beatrice, made the transatlantic flight from Boston to be at his side, sitting with him, reading him letters from well-wishers and trying to keep his spirits up. For a brief period, Patton's powerful constitution gave his doctors reason for optimism. On December 17th, 8 days after the accident, official medical bulletins reported his general condition as excellent. Miraculously, one report even noted a slight but significant improvement in sensation, which suggested the paralysis might not be total or permanent. Doctors began to prepare a body cast, hoping to stabilize him enough for the long-awaited flight home to the United States. The general himself, however, seemed to understand the reality of his situation. He was famously quoted as snapping to his doctors, "If there's any doubt in any of your kiddie minds that I'm going to be paralyzed for the rest of my life, let's cut out all this right now and let me die." The flicker of hope was short-lived. A few days later, Patton became restless. His breathing, already compromised by the high spinal injury, became labored. The true enemy was not the fractured bone, but the paralysis itself. Total immobility is a dire threat to the human body, and his condition began to deteriorate rapidly. On December 21, 1945, at 5:55 p.m., General George S. Patton, Jr. passed away in his sleep. He was 60 years old. The official cause of death is the final mundane irony of his life. The man who had survived 2 world wars was not, in the end, killed by the car crash. He was killed by its consequence. The official medical conclusion was that he died of a pulmonary embolism. A blood clot, which had formed in one of his immobilized, paralyzed limbs, had broken free. The clot traveled through his circulatory system and lodged in his heart or lungs, stopping his circulation instantly. Patton was, in effect, a casualty of 1945-era medicine, while modern surgical techniques might not have reversed his paralysis. His death was almost certainly preventable. Today, a patient with such significant trauma and immobility would immediately be placed on anticoagulant, blood thinning, medication specifically to prevent the formation of the very kind of deep vein thrombosis that ended his life. The great pioneer of 20th century mechanized warfare died because 20th century mechanized medicine was not yet advanced enough to save him from a common, preventable complication. This end was a profound psychological tragedy. Patton's entire life was fueled by a romantic 19th century fantasy of dying in a blaze of glory on the battlefield. The accident denied him this, giving him the one fate he could not tolerate: helplessness. He was forced to endure 12 days of the one state that was the antithesis of his entire identity. His reported plea to "let me die" was not the bravado of old blood and guts. It was the rational, final request of a man who understood that, while his body was still alive, the warrior Patton had already perished on that roadside in Mannheim. His body was laid to rest not in America, but in Luxembourg, buried among the fallen men of his Third Army. But the story of his death was far from over. To understand the echoes of Patton's death, one must first return to the controversy that preceded it. His final months were defined by his disastrous tenure as military governor of Bavaria. Tasked with denazification, Patton, who never possessed diplomatic skills, grew frustrated with the process. On September 22, 1945, he held a press conference and made an infamous, impolitic statement. He told reporters that he did not see the need for this denazification thing, and, most damagingly, compared the Nazi Party to a simple Democratic and Republican election fight. The comments caused an immediate international uproar. His superior and longtime friend, General Eisenhower, was furious. Patton was swiftly relieved of his command of the Third Army and his governorship, reassigned to a paper army with no real duties. This controversy was the true proximate cause of his death. If Patton had not made those statements, he would not have been relieved of command. If he had not been relieved, he would not have been idle, aimless, and sinking into a deep depression in Bavaria in early December. His inability to control his mouth, a key component of the aggressive persona he built to hide his dyslexia, set the entire fatal chain of events in motion. It is what placed him in that specific 1938 Cadillac, on that specific road, at that specific time. The trivial, non-fatal nature of the accident is underscored by the fates of the other men involved. Major General Hobart Happ, who sat beside Patton, was completely uninjured. He went on to serve a long and distinguished career, commanding the 1st Cavalry Division in the Korean War and retiring as a lieutenant general. Patton's 19-year-old driver, PFC Horace Woodring, was also uninjured. He was cleared of any serious wrongdoing by the investigation. The truck driver, T5 Robert L. Thompson, was likewise uninjured. He was found to have made an improper turn, but the investigation cleared him of any charge beyond carelessness, and no disciplinary action was taken. This sheer, mundane triviality has proven culturally unacceptable. How could the warrior who survived the Meuse-Argonne, who raced across Sicily, and who relieved Bastogne be killed in a simple fender-bender? This question has fueled decades of speculation. This is the untold history, the birth of an enduring enigma. Books such as Robert Wilcox's Target, Patton and Killing Patton by Bill O'Reilly and Martin Dugard propose a darker, more sinister narrative. The central theory is that Patton was silenced. He was openly and aggressively anti-Soviet and had told colleagues he planned to tell the American people the truth about the emerging Cold War. The claim is that Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, or perhaps even rogue elements within the U.S. government, arranged the accident to stop him. and when the crash merely paralyzed him, an agent was supposedly sent into the Heidelberg hospital to finish the job, perhaps with poison. Mainstream military historians and Patton biographers, however, overwhelmingly refute these theories. Respected authors like Rick Atkinson, Carlo Dieste, and Jonathan Jordan point to the fundamental lack of evidence. First, as a method of assassination, a low-speed, unpredictable traffic accident is absurdly and comically unreliable. Second, there was no logical need to silence him. Patton was already neutralized. He was a 60-year-old quadriplegic. And more importantly, he had already been fired. His career was over, and his voice had been marginalized. Third, the mysterious death in the hospital requires no explanation. A pulmonary embolism is one of the most common and expected medical complications from the total immobility he suffered. There is no medical mystery to solve. The 1938 Cadillac Model 75 was repaired and is now on permanent display at the General George Patton Museum at Fort Knox, Kentucky, a physical monument to the story's final irony. The conspiracy theories themselves are perhaps the most revealing part of his legacy. They are a modern-day myth-making exercise. Patton, who craved a romantic warrior's death, was denied it by fate. These theories retroactively give it to him. They transform his mundane, wasteful end into a final act of war, a battlefield death at the hands of a sinister enemy. They provide a more comforting narrative, proving that he was, in the end, too dangerous to be left alive. The enduring enigma is not in the facts of his death, but in our cultural refusal to accept that a life so large could end in a way so small.